Some background on Coquitlam. So Coquitlam is a founding member of the Partnership for Water Sustainability in BC, which really looks at watersheds and how to protect them. And Coquitlam was already featured in 2014 with a case study about how Coquitlam manages watersheds and does a good job of that. And there's always room for improvement, and even for continuity. Melanie Burton from Port Coquitlam now was part of that, so I think we'll get good coverage between the two cities. So I'll talk about three main things today, and they're all focused on how does Coquitlam protect the environment related to stormwater. So the IWMPs, that's what Coquitlam calls them, the Integrated Watershed Management Plans. And a watershed, that's an area of land where all the water drains to the same spot. And every watershed can have slightly different environmental needs, so that's why we come up with unique plans for each area. And the goal is to preserve watershed health while still facilitating growth and development. And we want it to be cost-effective, scientifically defendable, and then supported by the public and endorsed by any environmental agencies. So as you can see on the slide there are two main components to IWMPs: the investigation that we do, the first part, and then what results out of it. And I'll go through each in more detail. So this map shows the IWMPs that have been completed for the urban watersheds within Coquitlam. And the last one actually that we're working on, you can see here, is Maple Creek, and that's a partnership that we've done with Port Coquitlam. And so in terms of the policies, then these are some of the policies that can help us enforce those results that we're looking for. So the Stormwater Management Policy and Design Manual, that's linked to our Subdivision and Development Servicing Bylaw. And then within the source controls or other regulations, there's some prescriptive measures that says you must do exactly this. And then there's some performance measures that say, however you get there, this is the performance that we need to see. So that gives some flexibility on how to achieve the results that we're looking for. And then the riparian area regulations are contained within our zoning bylaw. And all of this, again, is focused on stormwater quality and quantity. In addition to what you see there with our policies, we have education on our website that talks about what individuals, homeowners, and businesses can do to help. And we even have a spill response program if there are incidents. So there's a program and guidelines as to how to respond. So in terms of the physical measures, so what then results physically in the city? And Coquitlam, we really wanted to make sure that we covered all parts of the city. So single family developments, larger developments, and even the city projects on city right-of-ways. So in general, we establish riparian areas which have this setback protection from all the creeks. For single family properties, this is where there is some prescription. We require 300 millimeters of topsoil, which helps absorb some of the rainwater that comes in. Hard surfaces are graded towards these landscaped areas, and we encourage permeable paving materials and rain barrels. Larger developments have those same requirements, and then also some performance-based measures to help reduce the post-development flows to be 50% of pre-development flows for a 2-year storm. And we even have something called our Green Star program, and that recognizes people and businesses who build better. So they get recognition, which helps build momentum and educate on what types of things are possible. And as well for the city, again, for our roads or boulevard areas, we have the same topsoil, and then also something called infiltration galleries, where we try to help get more water back into the ground, and roadside swales and rain gardens that help with water quality. We have some water quality ponds that we look to do to improve creek water quality. And then we have some ongoing maintenance for that, like cleaning out the debris and sediment that we see there. And some major diversion sewers that we build for major flows. So we want to keep those base flows in the creek, but when we get those big storms, we put it all into a large pipe so we don't get that kind of erosion. In addition, we have some base flow augmentation. So that looks at storage tanks, to help collect some of the rainwater and then put it back into the creek during times of low flow. And we're looking into options for groundwater to also supplement those base flows in the summer. And finally, there's creek enhancements, whether that's habitat or erosion mitigation, and culvert passage improvements for fish, to improve fish access. Any questions on any of these measures before I go to the next slide? Sure, Cherie.
I do have just a quick question on, you mentioned that there was a 3 mils of topsoil requirement for single family homeowners.
The 300, yeah.
Oh, sorry, for 300, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there's any follow-up. So once development is established, is there any follow-up year to year with homeowners on whether or not they maintain that topsoil level or level of permeability on their property?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of those ones I'll have to get back to you on. I know certainly when the house is built, there's that inspection by our building department, and then I'll have to get back to you on what kind of proactive investigation we do.
Thank you.
I know we do have something called LIDAR, which really looks at the ground cover and whether it's impervious or permeable. And so we do have data available to help with that, and that is citywide. And we do that regularly, but I can get back to you on that. Any other questions that anyone has on some of these physical measures before I talk more about monitoring?
Melissa Chan has a question as well.
Thanks, Jerry. Johnathan, in constructing your boulevards, does the city ever use the deep root technology of putting in those large, I mean, unfortunately they're plastic, I think, PVC framework to really create a lot of space for the organic material when planting boulevard trees?
Yes, yeah, we do. We use that and something called structural soil. So that's where there's larger rock with the voids filled with organic material. So it depends on the scenario, but we'll use both where best suited.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I've seen a presentation once where someone summarized it and said it takes brown, the soil, to make green, the trees. And that's one way to do it. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll jump into some of the monitoring that we do. So there's 3 main things that we do. Adaptive monitoring, I'll talk more about that on the next slide because it's more complex. Flow monitoring, that's where we look at what's actually happening. So we look at what kind of flows we're getting into our creeks and then what that means for the type of rainfall that we're seeing. And that helps us ensure that there's no flooding. We really look at erosion. And then specifically in terms of climate change, we've also been looking into updating what we call our IDF curves. So that's just how we predict the intensity and frequency of anticipated storms over time. Culvert inlet and outlet monitoring, we physically inspect the infrastructure to make sure that the condition's okay. Because if there is a failure, it would have a big environmental, social, and economic impact. So we do regular inspections. But now I can jump more into our adaptive monitoring framework. So what we do with this is we really look at the flow monitoring, water quality, and benthic invertebrates for all watersheds on a 5-year cycle. And that means we typically review 3 creeks each year. And the water quality sampling that happens twice a year, once in the wet season and in the dry season. And they take 5 samples for a 30-day period to get an average of what's happening. And the benthic monitoring, that happens once a year, and that takes place in the spring. And what that does is it gives us an indicator by the abundance and diversity of the benthics of the environmental condition. And in terms of water quality data, that's where we look at things like temperature, oxygen, turbidity, E. coli, nitrogen, iron, and other measures. And so all of that gets published and reported on a regular basis. And the flow monitoring, that's where we do temporary flow monitors either in a culvert or across the profile of the creek. And we go during various rainfall events with velocity meters to actually check what's happening in the creek. We review those results with our environment division, share with the Ministry of Environment, and then there might be actions coming out of that depending on what we're seeing. So in 2021, we're looking at Nelson, Como, and Booth Creek. Now, Coquitlam River specifically is, I think, as you all know, quite special to Coquitlam. So we've always done a little bit extra and a little bit different for this river. On a personal note, I've also enjoyed walking along the river and having some barbecues there with my wife and little kids. But in terms of this one, so we've monitored the water quality of the Coquitlam River in the summer and fall from 2012 to 2017. And so we have quite a robust baseline data set. And from that work, which followed that adaptive monitoring protocol, we found that the overall water quality in the river was good. So it's in that green category. And then the consultant's final report concluded that the monitoring can be done every 5 years. So we plan to go out next year again for Coquitlam River. And that is all I had in terms of formal presentation, but I'm happy to answer any comments on any of the monitoring that we do.
I do have one more question for you.
Of course.
Are there any times of year, I'm wondering, in the summer with increased use, like recreational use, are there any times of year that you're seeing the water quality decrease in the Coquitlam River?
Yeah, and that's why we do it twice a year, because summertime is very different than wintertime. Wintertime, there's more flow, and the temperature is lower. So we do typically find that there might be, compared to winter anyways, elevated levels of E. coli in the summer because the water is warmer and there's less water, and so it doesn't flow as much and clean as much. And that's typical and common for all watersheds in this area. And we make sure that it meets the environmental requirements per the Ministry of Environment. And for Coquitlam River specifically, it was within the greens.
Awesome. Thank you. And is it possible to get a copy of your presentation once this meeting is over, or down the road?
Absolutely, of course. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments?
There is a question from Anne. Anne, did you want to unmute yourself and go ahead?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there plans to include, I noticed on your list there that you referred to single residential as far as how much soil. Are there plans to put guidelines out for multi-residential units? Or how does that work for stratus?
Yeah, so multifamily, that's what that covers under the larger development sites. So that's where they have to do all of that, plus the performance-based measure of reducing the post-development flows to 50% of pre-development for that 2-year storm.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions, comments?
I've got another one, Jonathan. It's Melissa here. With regards to flooding and our changing climate, has the province started to use different metrics for categorizing the 200, the 100, 200, and 500 year floodplains?
Okay, yeah, I'm not so in terms of floodplains, there's the Fraser Basin Council, which is a regional group that looks at flood modeling. So that has been done on a regional level. Now, in terms of the storm intensities, that's where I mentioned that Coquitlam specifically anyways, has done a review of the different storm return periods, and that's our IDF curves, and we'll be updating that in our design criteria this year.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just curious because, yeah, I don't know how often the province revisits those categories, those criteria. I just feel like, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking as an engineer, I know this is also a big thing for engineers and geoscientists BC. So that's also being pushed even by that group to update things like IDF curves across the province. So that things like that advocacy work is what helps Coquitlam make these kinds of updates and receive support to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure other cities are doing the same.
So what does IDF stand for?
Intensity, duration, and frequency.
Great, thank you.
We also have a question from Councillor Makura. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation today. I found it very interesting. I wanted you to please speak a little bit more about regular inspections and how are these actually done and how frequently are they done?
And do you mean inspections of the creeks or inspections of developments or of culverts?
Well, specifically, For example, there was a huge flood in Port Coquitlam last year. And from my understanding, I think that there was some kind of debris that ended up clogging up a culvert near the Hyde Creek hatchery. And it came down from Burke Mountain. And then it ended up plugging the culvert during the storm. And it was quite an extensive flood that happened into some people's basements and things. So I'm just trying to visualize it a little bit more over on the Coquitlam River, if it's designed in any way similar, because I wouldn't want that to happen, next creek over, if you will.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so if I understand, you're asking about the inspections we do maybe of culverts, inlets, or outlets. I don't know the actual frequency, so I can get back to you on that, but I know we do base it on historic performance and what we see. So there's some some areas where there are no problems, so we wouldn't go there as often. But if there's other areas where we see more debris regularly or we see more problems, we go there more often to check it and to clean it out. And we've also been looking into potentially even trying to use drones to help speed up this inspection. So we're continually looking for ways to improve that and to do more with less or the same kind of budget.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, unless anybody has any questions, we'll move on to the next presentation. Johnathan, thank you so much for your presentation.